possible. In this segment of altruism is yoga. Altruism is yoga is what we are considering when we broke off for lunch. And there are certain statements which are there as quotes in the book. Madame Blavatsky writes, altruism is an integral part of self-development. This is from the Voice of the Silence. Madam HPB writes, altruism is an integral part of self-development. This self she is talking about is the personal development, the individual's development. Altruism is very important. We are talking about self-knowledge. She is not talking about that self, that Atma Buddhi Manas, that self she is not talking. She is talking about the real, ordinary self. HPB writes, altruism is an integral part of self-development. This is a quote from the Voice of the Silence. So, altruism, you need not think it is something separate from life. It is part of life. Integral part of life. That means it's a very, very important part of life. It's built within that life. So, that's how you have to understand altruism. It is not something which is invited sometime to be there, sent away other times. No, it is integral part of life. It's part and whole and part and parcel of life. So that's what Madame Blavatsky says about altruism. HPB again says in her book, The Path of Occultism, this also, The Path of Occultism, were a series of lectures she has given, which were produced as a book. So, Path of Occultism is the book. Maybe we can also call the lecture bar book. And there she says, true occultism or theosophy, true occultism and or theosophy, you can also say and theosophy, true occultism or theosophy is the great renunciation of the self, unconditionally and absolutely. True occultism or theosophy is the great renunciation of the self, unconditionally and absolutely, in thought as in action. So, great renunciation. It's not an easy renunciation. It's not something which we can do in a flash, but it is something which you have to think a lot and then renounce. So that self which you think we have taken care of, to build it over a period of time. I'm this, I'm that, I'm so and so and so. All this self, it goes without a trace, without a trace. So, this true occultism or theosophy is the great renunciation of the self. So, the self has got tremendous amount of images. It is built over a period of time. So, that images, all that needs to be dropped. And it should be dropped unconditionally and absolutely. Absolutely means completely. Unconditionally means if this happens, I'll renounce self. No. I'll renounce the self just like that without any conditions. Unconditionally, I'll stop. Like unconditional love sometimes. You don't expect anything back from that person. You love that person. That is unconditional love. Like that, unconditionally renouncing means I have not placed any conditions for practicing altruism. So that's sort of a state where unconditionally and absolutely the great renunciation of the self is taking place. It is taking place in thought as well as in action. That means it is there and in action. That means there is no divergence between action and theory. Both are same. So I think of leaving, but I'm not able to leave in action. That is not correct. So I am very, very conscious of what I want to do, and then I am also doing or leaving, renouncing. So both in thought and in action, I am renouncing. Means my theory and practice is absolutely same. And in altruism, a person who is practicing altruism, it throws him out of calculations of the ranks of the living altogether. So this person who is practicing altruism or the method of living without helping, not for the sake of helping, but helping with the intention of just helping, not recognizing, not being recognized, or not wanting any help or anything like that. It is altruism and it throws him out of calculation. There is nothing like, he has to be this or he has to be recognized like this, nothing of that sort. He is absolutely out of all those calculations altogether, and life becomes altruistic life. So he no longer lives for himself. An altruist no longer lives for himself. And the desire to mold his life into patterns. I would like to be this, I would like to be that. If this happens, I would be there. All these calculations are not there. So he no longer lives for himself, and the desire to mold life into patterns disappears. All these patterns are one's own making. All these patterns are one's own making, and they will all have to come to an end. The pattern making means I would design, I would like to be this, I would like to be something else. So all that mechanizations or all that improvements which I think I want somewhere externally should happen and it should affect me or it should change me, the way people look at me should be different. All those calculations, they go away, and he no longer lives for himself, and the desire to mold life into patterns disappears, and patterns are one's own making. An individual makes those patterns. So all those things, pattern making, they all have to be end. This is another statement made by Madame Blavatsky in the book of Path of Occultism. Then we talked about skillful action, and that took us where all we went in the morning, talking about yoga. Altruistic progression is skill in the wiping out of the personal self. We have to note what exactly is the action which she was expecting. Karma yoga when she said, or skillful action when she said, what exactly she meant. Not the general description of yoga, karma, sukhaushalam. No, she is not saying that. There is something else she is saying. Altruistic progression is skill in the wiping out of the personal self, which can be achieved by closely observing the self. Unless I closely observe myself, the self which is making all the pictures of my own, and some are false, some are real, some are required, some are not required. If I closely follow, closely observe, then if I have the right skill to observe and eliminate things which are not required, then one can progress altruistically. So that yoga, that karma yoga, or the skillful actions she suggested was this. Altruistic progression is skill in the wiping out of the personal self. Radhaji used to say a lot of times the personal petty self. Petty because it thinks so mean sometimes, so cheap sometimes. So personal petty self has to be wiped out through skillful action, which can be achieved by observing the self very closely. So this is a statement made by Madam Radhaji. And this is an interesting thing because a lot of people say, I fear God. You don't fear God, you love God. You don't fear God, you love God. But a lot of people say, God-fearing person. That's a wrong description. God-fearing person, meaning he's a good person. No. Maybe he thinks he wants to listen to the dictums of what the religious scriptures say and all that. So we say he's God-fearing person. Madam, what is she saying? It's not fear of God which is the beginning of wisdom. It is not the fear of God which is the beginning of wisdom. So fear of God is not required to get wisdom. But we think like that. God-fearing person, naturally we think he's wise and good and all the rest of it. But it's not fear of God which is the beginning of wisdom, but the knowledge of the self, which is wisdom itself. What he needs to acquire, what he needs to observe and absorb. Absorb is a word which we all have forgotten perhaps to use. We absorb. But the knowledge of the self, which is wisdom by itself. So this is what is required in altruistic life. And then another quote of Madame Blavatsky from the Path of Occultism, Atma Vidya, which is self-knowledge, is the only kind of altruism, that any theosophist, there are certain other words, who is a theosophist, who is a theosophical member, that she is avoided. So Madam Radhaji has cut it off and she has put dots there. In the book it is available like that. Atma Vidya is the only kind of altruism that any theosophist who would be wise and unselfish ought to strive for. Sadhana, ought to exert for. Altruism that any theosophist who would be wise, he's already got that wisdom, so he's wise and unselfish. This stress on unselfishness, the self being observed, observing within, all these things have come a number of times because that's the process in which one has to move forward. So, Atma Vidya is the only kind of altruism that any theosophist who would be wise and unselfish ought to strive for. So, what are the qualifications? He is to be wise, he also has to be unselfish if he has to work for altruism. So, this is maybe the sum and substance of altruism yoga. Then we'll move into the next segment, which is observe what is happening within. From the beginning of this book, from the beginning page of this book, Madam Radhaji was talking about how to look within, how to look objectively within. So this is something which is going on, and that process continues. And she says in this, the existence of the self is known through the movement of the self in the form of thought, emotion, motivation, and so forth. So when we are observing the self, you know the movement the self is doing or undergoing. So the movement of the self from the angle of thought, from the angle of emotion, and from angle of motivation. So we know all the three and how the movements are taking place. And she says, in the absence of movement, when there is no movement of the self being watched, one cannot be aware of the self. In the absence of movement, unless I observe closely, unless I see it very closely, unless I see what is happening within me, and perhaps, as someone was asking, if I don't have to have something which I should continue, I should be having the guts to drop it. I should have the courage to drop it. So that's what is required of a person. And so, if I don't observe the movement and I cannot be aware of the self. So this is what she said. And to understand the nature of self, one has therefore to observe what is happening within. This observing of happening within is something which is stressed almost from the first page. So this section is completely dedicated to the aspect of observing or what is happening within. And she says, clarity, a logical outlook, and keen observations are necessary to enable a person to see these movements and understand them. Clarity. How does one get clarity? If one is simple in his life, one is not complicated in his life, as we discussed in the morning. If he is simple in his life, there is scope for clarity. And if there is clarity, then it gives place to humility. And that humility takes one to divinity. So simplicity takes one to clarity, clarity takes one to humility, humility takes that person to divinity. So she is mentioning clarity. So there is so much of a process to get clarity also. Clarity, a logical outlook. It doesn't come just like that. Clear vision, clarity, it doesn't just come like that. It has to be practiced. So clarity, a logical outlook, and keen observations are necessary to enable a person to see the movements. Because she said, unless you observe the movements, you will not know. In the absence of movement, you are not aware of the self. So one has to observe the movements, understand them. Sharpness and clarity are facilitated by the observation of the external facts. Sharpness and clarity are facilitated by the observation of external facts. So the external facts also have to be observed and juxtapose them with what is happening within. Juxtapose them with what is happening within, and your sharpness increases because those things which are happening outside you, they may not be of value to you, or sometimes they may add value to you. So it depends on what sort of movements are happening externally. So sharpness and clarity sometimes are facilitated when the observation is taking place externally also. So an eye unaccustomed to observation, an eye, she is talking about the inner eye, not the external eye. Of course, we have to see the external things, we use this eye, but looking within, to observe what is happening within, we need to have the other eye, the inner eye. An eye unaccustomed to observe is inevitably handicapped. Inevitably means necessarily, without any scope for the other thing to happen. An eye unaccustomed to observation is inevitably handicapped. It falls into a disadvantageous position for the task of knowing the self. So this is what she is talking about, clarity, and what sort of movements, how one should observe more internally, and sometimes something which is happening externally, if that is giving some value addition to me, to add value to me, I take it inside, if it is valuable. Otherwise, most of the time we throw it off. But then an eye unaccustomed to observation, inevitably handicapped for the task of knowing the self. So this is the final word she is giving on how one is handicapped, means one is put into a disadvantageous position because he doesn't seem to be having the methodology of looking within. It's simple. You may close your eyes or you may not close your eyes, but you should know how to direct the thought inside. So you're seeing with the mental eye, you're thinking closely, observing closely, internalizing what is observed outside into oneself, and that's how the whole process of observing keenly is taking place. That keen observation will give us clarity, right? And in the same section, she is adding these words: a mind which learns to be rational, a mind which learns to be rational, it believes in reasons and reasoning out, this is right, this is not right. It is able to apply rationality to the observation. A mind which learns to be rational and logical in the observation of facts is also necessary, as without the capacity to be rational, it is likely to be deceived. If rational, looking at facts without the reason, without justifying, if I simply take in, you might be deceived, because what is appearing to be true may not be true. So this is required, that rational observation, logical observation is required. Logical is, you know very clearly, if I go from this step to the next step should take me to the ultimate goal. That is logical, going towards the goal. So a mind which learns to be rational and logical in the observation of the facts is also necessary, as without the capacity to be rational, it's likely to be deceived. So the mind can fall into deception. That is when you say Maya is taking over me. I'm no longer factually verifying what needs to be internalized or what needs to be taken inside me. So this is what she's saying. And deceit is part of the composition of self. Deceit is part of the composition of self. So this is part of the self, but we should know with logical thinking, rational thinking, how we can put it away, take it away. So this is what she is saying. It is always trying to be other than what it is. This self, it is always thinking, or is always trying to project other than what it is. I'm a 10th class fellow, but I would like to pose that I'm a MA in economics. I'm giving an ordinary example. This is how it would like to pose. It is always trying to be other than what it is. And why it is doing this? It is to impress others. Is it for impressing others we are leading the life, or to impress ourselves we are leading the life? That is a choice we have to make. We don't have to impress others, but much of the time is spent on impressing others. So she says it is always trying to be other than what that man is and seeking to impress others by what it is not. So in Panchatantra there is a character called Ashada Bhuti. He always says to his guru that he is very honest, someone who is going with him to learn, but he is actually interested in the money which people have donated to the guru, which he is carrying, and when guru is sleeping, this man takes away. That's projecting as a good person, but actually his intentions are bad. So this is what generally happens. Then the knowledge of the self is obtained. This is very interesting, very emphatic statement. The knowledge of the self is obtained only by those who have real intention to understand. The knowledge of the self is obtained only by those who have a real intention to understand. Means he should have absolutely no doubt that this is the way I want to go, this is the process which I want to adopt, and there are no two ways about it. He is very clear. So the knowledge of the self is obtained only by those who have a real intention to understand. I want to understand what self is. I have negated what is not. So finally, I am arriving at what is self. So that is the normal practice which the Vedantins talk about. You say neti, 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 this is not that, this is not that. And finally what it is. Like the ordinary example which people give, when you peel off onion, the red things go, slightly brown things go. Finally, the kanda remains. That's the self. So all the top layers have gone. If all the top layers have gone, I make a very sincere attempt to leave or remove all the layers. I arrive at the kanda or the mula. That's the way in which one has to go about. So that's the process which people have to understand, and not many are ready to do it. So since such intention does not commonly exist, such intention to work hard doesn't commonly exist, very few human beings have achieved self-knowledge. So that's the reason why self-knowledge is becoming a rarity, because there are very few people who really want they really want to understand and achieve that. So unless you have the thirst for it, you will not go for it. So that's what Madam is saying. Since such intention does not commonly exist, very few human beings, very few human, we count Buddha, like that only few people have done it. So other people, maybe they're trying, we do not know, or some people do not even are aware of there is something which we have to go for other than the material comforts which are outside us. But this is true unless one has that ardent desire to know, which many people haven't had it. So that is the reason why very few humans have achieved self-knowledge. And there are a lot of vested interests which are hidden in a human being. There are a lot of things which are not really required to be there, but they are vested interests which are there, and they form the formidable obstacles in reaching the self. All this so-called vested interest means certain things where there is personal element of sense of achievement or whatever, they are all there. So these are all the obstacles to inquire into the self. So this is how she's talking about looking within oneself. And now she says, people have tried for centuries to change systems, theories, and all things except themselves. This is the problem. So we all know this theoretically. We would like to see the change in others, but not change ourselves. A lot of people say, the other man is not doing, so I am not doing. Not necessary at all. You do because you believe in doing it. So people have tried for centuries to change systems, theories, and all things except themselves. They don't want to change their basic nature. While the solution to the problems of the world is so obviously in the creator of the problems. Where are the problems and where are the solutions? Whoever has created the problems, he is the person who can find the answers. So it is not externally you can find out something, answers, and somebody else who is living outside you. Maybe he could be a very big guru or a very big evolved soul. Still, he can only show a pointer, but he will not take you across. So, the creator of the problem has to find the solution to the problem. So, man is supposed to be the person who has to find solutions. So, Krishna ji says in most of his lectures, you are the world and the world is you. You are the world and the world is you. You think you're separate, but you have created the world. And you have created all the problems. You have to find out answers for it, all by yourself. Somebody else, it will not come from heavens, it will drop into your lap. Man does not want to look within himself for solutions. This is the unfortunate part of it. Man does not want means he refuses to look into himself for finding solutions. He wants quick fix solutions. I don't want to work hard. It should come just like that, like solutions which are immediately possible, like instant coffee or quick fix solutions. That should give me relief. That should give me relief from the problems I have. So nobody wants to look within. So this is a very unpleasant fact, says Radhaji. All this ensues, all this progresses from the fact what was originally a simple biological instinct of self-protection has become for the human being a psychological drive to acquire things. Because he doesn't want to stop acquiring things. He doesn't want to stop seeking. So originally, as somebody who goes to these personality development classes, they're showing the Maslow's tower. He starts with basic needs, which everybody uses in their personality development classes. So originally man thought that he needs few needs for his biological survival or to satisfy the instincts of his biological needs for self-protection. But he has become a human being of psychological drive for acquiring things, seeking things, and seeking things which he is perhaps not even aware of. Somewhere in America, something is being done. I wish it comes to India, I would like to acquire. These are all the things which we have in our system. So she goes on saying the importance of looking within, the exercise of looking within, which she started from the page 1 of this book, almost to the end of this book. She carries on with that, and we have to look within constantly, incessantly, and find out the solutions for the problems which we have created for ourselves. And even to understand and the nature of self, we need to observe the self, we need to observe the movements of the self so that we know where we're heading. So this is where that particular section, observing what is happening within, ends. I've picked up certain salient points so that you could read extensively and expand upon it using your own thought. Then we get into the next session or next segment, which is another interesting segment, which is purifying the mind, which all of us yearn for. We all want that purification of the mind to take place. At least people who are in the spiritual organizations, we hear that purification of the mind is very important, and we crave for it. We want to do it. And even here, we want somebody to purify our mind, not do it ourselves. So what does she say about purifying the mind? We'll see. To know the self clearly, under the purifying the mind, she is saying, to know the self clearly, it is necessary to apply oneself to the task with care, with assiduous care. Means a care where there are no breaks, one is at it all the time. Assiduously means with a lot of perseverance. To know the self clearly, it is necessary to apply oneself to the task with care. It is not enough to say, I'm greedy. Suppose somebody recognizes I'm within himself, looking at within himself, I'm greedy. It's not enough to say, I'm greedy, and so on, and immediately turn away to look at other things. At least you should be there with that understanding of what is greediness, what is that I want to possess for myself. Everything which is outside me, I would like it to be mine. Greed is the green monster, they say. That is possessing me. So, can I stay with that greed and greediness so that I can understand it and put it aside? Or having said, I'm greedy, immediately I'm turning my attention to some other thing. I've realized it, but something else seems to be more interesting. So I immediately move to something else. She's saying, it is not enough to say that I'm greedy and so on, and immediately turn away to look at some other things. The I, in its desire to survive, the I, individuality or me, in its desire to survive, urges one to turn away all the time. The I wants to remain. You can't silence the I. Suppose I give off ego. A lot of people say you should become ego-less and not ego-full, isn't it? So there are a lot of people, suppose I remove everything of my ego, what is there, sir, which is remaining? Why should I give off? And how will I survive? People do ask that question. So what will remain after everything goes? What is permanently there, including these bodies which are there, which have not gone, they remain with you. But the ego-fullness goes. Similarly, if the I has to go, that is something which is not palatable for many. Oh, what do I do if I goes? So she's saying why people look elsewhere is because the I, in its desire to survive, urges one to turn away all the time. So it wants to preserve. The I wants to preserve. The me wants to preserve. So I know I'm greedy, but I don't want to look into that greediness. So I look elsewhere immediately because I has to survive. So that's what Madam is saying. So this is an age-old mental nature of human being. This is an age-old, very old mental nature, and the unwillingness to give up an established order of things. She talked about it in the previous things also. There is a steady opposition to leave the things which are not required, but then the system which is not working for your advantage, you should be able to leave it. But this is what she's saying, the unwillingness to give up an established order of things is behind the impulse to look away. I don't want to change myself, I'm unwilling to change myself, and I want to give up. I don't want to give up. I would like to give up even the qualities which need to be there permanently. See, these qualities which are related to the lower quaternary, they die with these bodies, whereas certain other qualities which I pick up, which will be part of the permanent self, will continue to be part of me, and the essence of that will go to the causal body. And with the help of the essence which is there, the next life can take shape. But all these small things like greediness or wanting to possess things or wanting to acquire things which are with, say, Ramesh, who is sitting in the front seat, I want to remove it from him and make it mine. All these things are not required. A lot of things, a lot of qualities are there. So all these things have to be removed, and we don't want to do that. We are against the established order of things. So that's the reason why we turn away quickly and steadily we will look elsewhere, not within ourselves. So if we look within ourselves, we know what to eliminate, and eliminate for once for all. So she says, to enable a person to do all this, there must be enough prayer, contemplation to bring about a firm conviction that there is no solution for a human problem except in purifying the mind. So there should be prayer, contemplation. See, if you have studied, if you have contemplated, if that is there with you, then it's easy for you to understand that the human problem's solution lies in purifying the mind and not looking elsewhere. If you want to solve the problem, you should look into the problem, address the problem, look squarely into the problem and find solutions. But if you want to avoid, if you want to duck, thinking that the problem will go sail over you, it will not sail. It will go behind and come back and hit you. So this is something which we normally try to do. So she says, prayer, contemplation to bring about the firm conviction that there is no solution for the human problem except in purifying the mind. So purification of the mind is the only way in which these problems can be solved. So like yesterday we said, the 60, the 6 goes, the 0 remains, then that's pure. But all the 6 are continuing with me even after 60, 61, 65, 70, and I do a Bhimarata Shanti at 80. Doesn't matter, whatever you do, the mind seems to be the same thing, holding on to all the 6 antarshatrus. So there is no progress for that man. So she says the contemplation which should be a tool to look in oneself and find out the solutions for the human problems, which actually remains in purifying the mind. The human problem is, of course, each person's problem as well as all the humanity's problem. Individual problem, like what Krishna ji said some time back, you are the world and the world is you. Your problem is the problem of the world, or the problem of the world is also your problem. If there is a war in the country, it's your problem. War is coming because of selfishness. If I am selfish, I am also a reason for the war coming. So a lot of selfish people in the country. Yes, perhaps we are promoting that attitude of aggression and war. So this is how she says. And the self of matter, this is, note down, this is a very, very interesting thing. The self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. The self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. They can't coexist. One of the twain must disappear. Of the two, one has to go. What has to go? The one which is temporary. Matter is temporary, relatively speaking. So that has to go. So the self of the matter and the self of the spirit can never meet. So with those two things together, you can't make a progress. Like the usual simile people get or give. You can't travel keeping your feet in 2 boats or ride 2 horses, one of matter and one of spirit. So this is something which you have to seriously think in terms of. This is also from the voice of the silence. The self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. This is a quote from the voice of the silence. One of the twain or one of the two must disappear. There is no place for both. Very clear, there is no place for both. Either I am here, I am there. You enjoy being in matter, carry on. Maybe there are other lives to come. That is the way in which some people live, bohemian style of living. Okay, carry on like that. But both cannot survive. If the self of matter, which is the personal self with its animal inheritance, if the self of matter, which is the personal self with its animal inheritance and vested interests, selfish interest, I would like to somehow get it. Even if I'm not qualified, somehow I will see that I get that. Does not come to an end. They don't come to an end because one goes, another takes its place. One goes, another takes its place. So there is no end to it. And the splendor of spirit can never be discovered, saith the great law. When you are with matter, when you are engulfed in the sea of matter, you cannot understand the splendor of the spirit, the illumination of the spirit, or the great light which is around the spirit. Splendor. In order to become the knower of all self, this is another quotation from the book, Voice of the Silence. It requires a lot of deep thinking because one would think that there are words being played. That's how the quotation looks. In order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. If I'll read it again. In order to become the knower of all self, thou hast first of self to be the knower. To reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up the self to the non-self, being to non-being. So this self has to melt away. Similarly, the being which we think is important also has to disappear. And the overall picture of the universal self or the non-self, that should remain. Other than yourself, that should remain. So, in order to become the knower of all self, Thou has first of self to be the knower. You should know, you are the knower. You are the person who want to know. You should first identify yourself as a knower, as a person who would like to know things. That is one thing. If you have the desire to know about all self, the entire self, you should have the desire. You should identify yourself as the person. And then to reach the knowledge of that self, thou hast to give up the self to non-self. So unless you realize that this self, unless it goes and merges with the other self or identifies with the other self, it's not going to understand. So if you keep this self separately, also interested in matter, the spirit cannot be traced or found out. So this self has to go, this self has to melt. Like salt is put in water, the salt disappears. That's how the self has to go. The water will remain. The water is all self. Similarly, the being to non-being. So this being which is come into life and thinks that yes, it owns everything, it knows everything, that has to go. You have to know the overall self. This is the quotation from The Voice of the Silence. This cryptic truth is not seriously taken to heart because the personal self cleverly fills the mind with doubt about the statement and the hope that some other solution can be found. This truth is not seriously taken. That self has to go to realize the overall self. This being has to disappear to understand the real being. We don't understand this truth. This is cryptic, this very straight, very smart, very straight truth, but not seriously taken to heart because the personal self cleverly fills the mind with doubt. Is it possible that doubt arises? If suppose I remove myself, can I understand that? Should I try? Why should I try? These are all the doubts it has. So cleverly fills the mind with doubt about the statement. So the statement may be wrong. Why should I do this? So that's the way in which the mind thinks. And the hope that some other solutions can be found. Maybe there are other ways in finding the self or the universal self. Why should I sacrifice myself? Without that, maybe there is a way. Why should I put an end to myself? So that's how the mind is thinking. So the so-called spiritual seeker, the so-called, because he is not real, he is appearing to be spiritual seeker. The so-called spiritual seeker usually tries to find solutions through gods, through gurus and teachers, scriptures, and other people's words. This is exactly what Krishna ji used to talk about. The so-called spiritual seeker, he is not the real seeker, but he appears to be the seeker. He is there in every lecture of any person who is giving talk about how to evolve, how to get moksha. So he is there. He looks like a person interested in this sort of spiritual seeking, but he is so-called spiritual seeker. He is not the real seeker. So he usually tries to find solutions through gods, small g. So many people say Bhagavan, no? So many Babas, Baba is removed, now Bhagavan is coming. So through gods, through gurus, through teachers, scriptures, and other people's words, and also through mantras and ceremonials, through pseudo-saviors and murmuries of all kinds. So this is how man is going, chasing perhaps someone who would give him moksha. Moksha is not a capsule which a doctor prescribes. So how can one get moksha unless one gets rid of all attachments? So this is what she is saying. The so-called spiritual seeker usually tries to find solutions through gods, usually. Solutions through gods, gurus and teachers, scriptures and other people's words. So somebody's words may make you think. Maybe that words are so wonderfully couched or phrased. It might inspire you, but that if you own those words and make your own, maybe yes, it will become yours. But as long as you think it is Paramananda's words, it will not help you. Paramananda's words, they remain as that. So, also mantras and rituals. Mantras. Yes, mantras have certain powers because Bijaksharas are there and the mantras have got, drastas have composed those mantras. But merely chanting mantra without realizing the tattva which is there in the mantra. Suppose even somebody is saying Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. I don't recall what Rama stands for. He stood for Dharma. I don't recall that. And Krishna was an embodiment of love and compassion and knowledge, wisdom. I don't recall that. But simply chant like a tape recorder doesn't help. So that's what Madam is saying, that will not purify the mind. But there were people who wrote kirtanas, means krutis, praising God. Your chanting of your name has cleansed my heart. Yes, cleansing might take place when you have taken those words very seriously, put it into practice, and used it as your instrument or your tool. Then it has become something of your own. So that is how she says, therefore, it is essential to think out logically the basic questions and facts relating to life's problems. So we have to understand the problems of the life rationally, logically, the basic questions, and obtain a profound conviction that all one's energy must be directed towards understanding the self. Whatever energy I have, whatever power I have, that should go towards understanding the self rather than directing it externally to get things, seek things, get comforts. That is not going to help. That's perhaps the suggestion Madam is giving. So the entire energy has to be used for understanding the self. So the power has been given to you, the tools have been given to you to reach the self, to understand the self. But if that is not happening, the physical body is used to acquire things, or the comforts which are multiplying is the result of all this seeking. That is not going to help us. So she now says, this energy which she has talked about, energy, she talked about energy, right? This energy was called in the ancient literature as Virya. This energy, which was described in the ancient literature as Virya. Virya means the dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth out of the mire of lies terrestrial. This is again a quotation from the Voice of the Silence. This energy, this book contains this particular sentence, and this Virya is a very powerful word. Dauntless courage. This energy was called in the ancient literature as Virya, the dauntless energy that fights its way to the supernal truth. What is the supernal truth? Knowing the self. That is why you need this Virya. You are caught where? You are caught in a quagmire. Quicksand. You think it is a solid land and you put your foot there and you go inside. You get stuck inside. That's a quagmire. So you are in a mire of lies terrestrial. So this earth is full of things which are not real. So they are all lies. You are caught in that. So she says, quoting from the book, The Voice of the Silence, you need to have that energy which is called the Virya, dauntless courage, dauntless energy. Where there is such energy arising out of the absence of doubt. If you have doubt whether it works or it will not work, Even Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says, is it possible? Should I kill? Can I kill them? So Bhagavan says, Asamsayam Mahabaho. He said, no, don't have doubts. You are not killing anybody. I am taking care of it. Just do what you have to do. But this man has got all sorts of doubts. So where there is such energy arising out of absence of doubt, so I don't have doubt. I know Virya can take me to the other side. The dauntless courage or dauntless energy will take me to the other side. If I have a doubt, it will not work. Like the lady who carried milk to Ramakrishna walked on the Ganges. You know this story. She trusted him and she just walked. He asked, how did you come? You wanted me to walk on the Ganges? I walked. This is the reply she gave. So that sort of courage, that sort of virya is what the disciple should have, to realize the supernal truth, the ultimate truth. So, and to get that, to watch without such distraction, without seeking escape or excuses, it is all an aspect of dharana. Dharana is focusing on what I am supposed to do without disturbing my attention here and there. So this is what it is, and it's part of learning not to become what one is not. See this, the sentence has to be understood very carefully. This is without distractions, looking with dharana is one thing, and is part of learning not to become what one is not. For becoming is the search for the more outside. This is introduction to the next part. Not to be. I want to be, I want to show myself as something. So you are not supposed to be something. So she says, learning not to become what one is not. For becoming is the search for the more outside. This is where Madam Blavatsky has talked about. The last sentence, I'll finish with this. The labor involved in obtaining knowledge. Question answers is there, no? Is there, or can I continue? Your choice. Huh? The labor involved in obtaining knowledge of the self is not easy. Nothing is easy. The plate is full of food. If I don't put my hands and take it inside or take it nearer the mouth, it won't go. That is the sentences Anna Besant has written in the introduction to At the Feet of the Master. Nothing is easy, but this is not easier still. The labor involved in obtaining knowledge of the self is not easy. It's a lifelong task. It's not something which I do today and it will help me, but it's a lifelong, incessant, continuous task. So this is, we have to realize and work for it. So does the road wind uphill all the way? This is a poem she has taken from one of the poets. I know the name, but I am just going with the flow. Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Will the day's journey take the whole long day from morn to night, my friend? So she said it's a lifelong journey. So stress that she has given this poem. Is it something which will have to happen till the very end? Yes, to the very end. Will the day's journey take the whole long day, the whole life? Yes, from morn to night, from morning to night. Not only morning to night, from the time you are born, from the time you realize that you are an individual seeking wisdom, trying to understand the self. This keeps on. One keeps going towards that goal. Of course, there is Robert Frost, another poet who inspired Nehru, miles to go before. There is a famous poem which Robert Frost, if I remember right, Nehru used to quote that, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And she talks about the work. The work is such that it has to be done during all parts of the day. A lot of people think half an hour in the morning I do my puja. Rest of the time I do whatever I like, accept money which the other way, do something which is cruel, still I will be delivered. It's not possible. That's why we talked yesterday. The meditation is not going to stabilize the way you meditate. It will not help you because your rest of the life during the day is all contradictory. So if you want suddenly balance to take place, it will not come. Stability to take place, it will not come. The thoughts will keep coming. The work is such that it has to be done through all parts of the day, every day and through one's life. Every day and through one's life. So it's not something I do today, tomorrow I give holiday to it, third day I take it up again. It's not that. Sadhana means nirantara sadhana. Sadhana without gap. Nirantara is Sanskrit, sadhana is also Sanskrit. We have that in Telugu, nirantara sadhana. Antara is gap, without gap. The work is such that it has to be done during all parts of the day, every day and through one's life. It is not enough to set apart a little bit of one's time for it. It's not enough to set apart a little bit of one's time for it. He who would see beyond, he who wants to see beyond, means one who wants to reach the other realms. He who would see beyond must be possessed of an iron, never failing determination, and yet be meek and gentle, humble, and have shut out from his heart every passion that leads to evil. Iron is very strong. Iron bar is very strong. He should be like that iron bar. He must work like a person who is possessed. Possessed person has lot of strength because the other being has possessed him. His strength and the other being's strength also is added. So that is adding to the strength. So he is very, very strong. So like that, he would see beyond. He must be like a man who is possessed, means he is completely at it, with all the vigor, with all the determination, he is working for it. Like an iron, never failing determination. So his determination is not failing him even one single moment of his life. And yet, because he is strong, because he is determined, doesn't mean he should lose the other finer qualities. So immediately she covers up and says, "Yet be meek and gentle, humble, and have shut out from his heart every passion that leads to evil." This is from the Mahatma's letters, letter number 62. He should be meek and very humble, because I am strong within doesn't give me license to misbehave with anyone or cultivate some passions which will only take me down the drain. So this is very important. He who would see beyond must be possessed of an iron, never failing determination, and yet be meek and gentle, strong and gentle. That was the statement you heard in the Mystic Star yesterday. Strong and gentle. You are strong, but you are also gentle. You are also someone who would like to function with that nicety of being meek, gentle, humble, and all that. Humble and have shut out from his heart every passion that leads to evil. Passion, raga, passion, that shouldn't trouble you, that shouldn't be with you. You must have purified. That passion must have gone long back. So that passion shouldn't trouble you. The aspirant must be impelled by a spirit which says, there is a slide of this, but it's not going to work. The aspirant must be impelled by the spirit which says, being on the way to the great knowledge, I will reach the goal or die. Produce or perish used to be one common call given by Nehru. Being on the way to the great knowledge, we are talking about that great knowledge which we want to seek of the self. So I'm on that way, I'm on that path. So being on the way to the great knowledge, I will reach the goal or die. That should be the aim. I don't have any other option. Either I'll work for it. In working, sometimes I might fall, I might die. Yes, okay, no problem, but I'll work for it. This is what she says. And now again she says, Nirvana means nirvana. The first quotation was the nirvana, if you remember. Nirvana means literally to extinguish. Nirvana means literally to extinguish. Extinguishing means the light is gone. What is extinguished here? Extinguishing of all movement of the little self is the way to the great unknown region of nirvana. The extinguishing of all the movements of the little self. She has used the word little here, but normally she used to put in the lectures the petty self is the way to the great unknown region of nirvana. The terminology of yoga, it is called what our friend said in the morning. He's there? No. Dhruv Panda. The terminology of yoga, it is called the silencing of the movement, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. He talked in the afternoon and the morning. So that is what it is. So in the terminology of yoga, it is called the silencing of the movement or Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And nirvana means extinguishing, removing. There is no light there. It is all zero. What is that? You are reducing it to zero. All the movements of the little self to know the other self, the real self. So the self is negated completely. Self is not given any importance. It is required as a tool, but it is not required as a being, because the being, the small being is given to the non-being. That is already covered in the previous quotation. So, 3 more minutes. 3 more minutes, I'll stop. In the terminology of yoga, it is called the silencing of the movements of the mind, Chitta Vritti Nirodha. So the mind is the author of the petty personal self. She has used the petty. This is something which I remember so many times I've heard her saying. And she says, silencing the movements of the mind, for the mind is the author of the petty personal self. Mind creates that personal self. To reach nirvana, it is not the becoming of something, but the wiping away of selfishness. To reach nirvana is not the becoming of something. Because you have reached nirvana, you have not become a different individual altogether. But what has happened is the selfishness has disappeared. The Vedanta philosophy points out, Parabrahman or true being cannot be found by searching, by trying to add to oneself, whether it is an addition of knowledge or of anything else. This is a reference to Vedanta, where she says, it points out to the Parabrahman or the true being cannot be found by searching. A lot of people physically try to search the masters. It's not possible. We cannot reach the masters by searching for them. You have some description of the masters, don't think that they're like that. But a lot of people have tried. They've gone in Himalayas, maybe Tibetan valleys. You have urge to see them. Do they have, this person is qualified to meet me? So the selfishness has gone. Or if I am having that, even the desire to see the master selfishly, why do I want to see? I want to come back and say, I have seen the master. That's the reason why I want to see him, not for anything else. So he will not be available for us. This is the thing. Parabrahman is found through negation. We talked about neti, the way of saying this is not the thing, this is not the thing. So Brahman or Parabrahman is found through negation. but the denial of the false. Whatever is not right, whatever is not real, whatever is false, I keep it away so that I move into the segment of reality. Falsity expresses itself in the movement of the mind, which are based upon the notion, whether limited or extended, of survival and security. Okay, it is also the movement of seeking pleasure. The total negation of survival and pleasure is the giving up the self to non-self. There was a quotation some time back, self going to the non-self, being going to the non-being. She is now explaining this. The total negation of survival and pleasure is the giving up of the self to non-self. There is nothing which I seek, nothing which I want for myself. That is the stage. So the total negation of survival and pleasure, I don't even want to exist, in the sense, if that is going to add, that's going to be an avarodha, an obstacle for my finding the self. I don't want to be that. Even that self I've given up, because that self, that nature of self, if it's going to be an obstacle, I don't want that too. That's what it is. So the total negation of survival and pleasure is the giving up of the self to non-self, of being to non-being. Since each one has to negate his own little self, self-knowledge cannot be obtained from another. This is very, it is not possible, no guru can give it. She says self-knowledge cannot be obtained from another. The very definition or the very coinage of words, self-knowledge, one has to find out all by himself. That's the, so there is no way in which X will give it to you or Y will give it to you. It's not possible. It cannot be got through information in books. The way to self-realization, there are books, no doubt about it. But those contents which are there, Pratyabhigna Hridaya, that's the text. If I take that, Pratyabhigna Hridaya, if I adopt it into my life, I contemplate on that life, contemplate on that contents, make them as my own and use them as a springboard to achieve, yes, I can do it. But just the text, I read the explanation given by the greatest Aike Taiminiji, it will be only an explanation. If I have taken it within myself, adopted to my life, then it becomes a reality. So it cannot be got through information in books. The work has to be done by each person for himself, and it must be done daily. There is no way in which putting off. See, this is the reason why we don't progress. There is a discipline which is given where every day somebody should study, every day somebody should meditate, everybody should also contemplate, everybody should do some service, everybody should do the self-introspection. All these are there in the Pythagorean school. But our Vedantins also have talked about it. But then we don't do it every day. Whenever it suits, whenever it is convenient, we do. That's not the way. She says the work has to be done by each person for himself. Nobody else will work for you. No proxies. And it must be done daily. So there we end this purity of mind, purification of the mind. So we now have maybe some minutes